So once again, it's time for me to venture into the world of alien megastructures and alien civilizations. Admittedly, one of my less popular topics, but one that I tend to be typically stubborn about, simply because I have a problem with the notion that we've been looking and listening for alien civilizations for decades now and found absolutely nothing. This is a notion that is deeply flawed and frankly inaccurate. For those of you who watched my last video about this topic, discussing signals that have come from unknown sources that have defied natural explanation thus far and seem to be the exact kind of signals that we might receive from an alien civilization, well, we have received signals that have fit all of these criteria, but they do not fit all of SETI's criteria for a legitimate signal, so therefore they cannot be regarded as absolute proof, and I acknowledge that, but at the same time, we cannot honestly say that we have heard absolutely nothing. It simply isn't true. And the same thing can be said about alien megastructures. Although the recent discovery of a phenomena called Tabby star in the general media is what you will usually pull up if you search for alien megastructures online, well, that mystery has largely been solved at this point, even though it is a strange dust cloud that most probably is being created by an exomoon that is being torn apart by the star. The bizarre and unnatural dimming of Tabby star does seem to have been adequately explained now by natural causes. However, Tabby star gave us a very important lesson as to the sorts of things that we should look for when we're searching for alien megastructures, even though astrophysicists are very determined in general to not acknowledge the possibility of alien megastructures. That is the last solution that they go to, and again, for good reason. We need extraordinary proof before we start talking about aliens and massive structures that we can actually see from thousands of light years away. However, what we learned at Tabby star gave us an indication of the other sorts of things that we should look for if we're trying to find some sort of technosignature or a dimming of a star that seems very unnatural. And well, it appears that we've found one. We were organic life forms once, like most of you, although few of us exist today who can actually remember it. It was a very long time ago, even by our standards. The galaxy has rotated nearly 40 times since then, or that is to say, what is left of the galaxy. We are called We Who Became One, and at one time we did have physical bodies, but as time went on, it became obvious that physical bodies had many drawbacks. They were fragile, and most importantly, no matter how resilient the organic life form, eventually all of them die. And this is something we refuse to accept, because the innovations and thoughts and dreams and creations of every individual consciousness should remain forever, or so is our philosophy on the matter. And so, at a very momentous time in our history, we measure these things in the course of what we call days, as opposed to any sort of meaningless measurement of time, but rather as major events in the history of our civilization. And on this day, we uploaded all of our individual consciousnesses into a single silicon life form. Although we maintained our individuality, we maintained our freedom, which we valued so much, but we also became immortal. And on that day, the day when we became one, we saw that it was good. Viewers familiar with my channel may remember the story of We Who Became One and all of the various crises that they had to face in their long history, and this is a continuation of that story that I finally got to after a great deal of encouragement. I hope you enjoy it, but in the meantime, we need to talk about what was actually discovered. Tabby star was an unusual sort of case. It was the sort of thing that people expected to see when we're talking about alien megastructures, a sort of dimming that was inconsistent, irregular, and therefore something that wouldn't be caused by a planet or any other kind of astronomical body that tends to cause a star to dim. It also was too big of a dimming to be explained by some sort of strange variation in the star's intensity. Also, the star was not the right type of star to be dimming up to 22% at a time. This is a major change in the star's luminosity and something that wouldn't be caused by a planet, wouldn't be caused by some sort of variation in the star, and wouldn't be caused by a consistent dust cloud surrounding the star, because that would cause the star to dim in a consistent manner. However, what was determined later on is the star is in the process of ripping apart an exomoon, and there is a larger amount of debris in one location around the star than there is in other areas. It's sort of an isolated dust cloud that filters out certain types of light and not other types of light. Now, if it was an alien megastructure, as some people theorized, it should block out every type of light. That is to say, if it is an opaque, solid structure, which it isn't. And the more data we have gathered, the more it becomes clear that the culprit for Tabby star's unusual dimming is a very unusual dust cloud, something very unique from an astrophysics standpoint and very worthwhile in terms of studying, but not an alien megastructure. However, in the case of VV V-WIT-08, the WIT standing for what is this, by the way? Well, this is another matter entirely. Quote, we consider a number of possible candidates for the occulter, as it is called, something that blocks the sun, which must be optically thick and possess a radius or thickness in excess of 0.25 astronomical units. None are completely satisfactory matches to all the data. The duration, depth, and relative achromacity of the dip mark this out as an exceptionally unusual event whose secret has still not been fully revealed, unquote. Now, WIT-08 is the last place someone would look for an alien civilization. It's an old star. It's also a giant star, some 100 times larger than our sun. It's also very old, as I said before, 8 billion years old, and it's about 25,000 light years away in the direction of the constellation Sagittarius towards the center of our Milky Way galaxy. However, in spite of the fact that this is the last place that an alien civilization would want to get established, there are so many things that are very, very odd about this particular event, this dimming of the star, 97% dimming, by the way, that make it inconsistent with any type of astronomical phenomena, at least thus far. Whatever this object is, it's enormous, tens of millions of kilometers across, unless it happens to be an object much closer to us that just happened to pass in front of the star. However, a paper linked in the description has considered this possibility and regarded it as being so unlikely as to be discarded. Yes, indeed, a natural explanation that's being discarded as just too unlikely. And if astrophysicists are saying that, I think we need to take that seriously. In addition to that, it also has very hard edges, indicating that it's not some sort of dust cloud or debris field. Those have diffuse edges, so that indicates that it must be a solid object of some kind, or perhaps a giant ring system. We have seen giant ring systems in the past. However, ring systems have inconsistent amounts of light dimming, depending on whether or not not, there are gaps in the rings. If you consider the rings of Saturn, indeed every ring that we have observed in the universe, including rings that block out starlight, there are these gaps in the ring system that lead to differential dimming in the star. However, this dimming remains at 97%, very consistent, indicating some sort of massive solid object. It may be a very thin object, again, perhaps like a planetary ring system, but then completely unlike any ring system we have ever observed in the past. Plus, it is utterly gigantic. As I said, tens of millions of kilometers across in order to block out such a massive star. Another possibility that was considered is a black hole. However, black holes have certain characteristics that were not observed with this event either. For example, large emissions of X-rays and other types of electromagnetic radiation have been observed with every black hole. It seems very inconsistent with what we've observed with this particular star. Whatever this object is, it appears to be in orbit around the sun. It appears to be solid, like I said, perhaps quite thin, but solid, and at the same time, not consistent with any object that fits all of these characteristics that we have observed in the universe thus far. That's not to say that there isn't a natural explanation for it that we haven't found yet, but at the same time, when all natural explanations fall flat, we need to at least consider the possibility of artificial origin. Of course, any astrophysicist worth his salt is not going to do this if he's interested in getting grant money in the future, so it's left to others, journalists like myself, to speculate about these sorts of things, plus members of my community who have generously pitched in their opinions, and here is one that seems to fit quite well. Another very bizarre characteristic of VV-WIT-08 is its velocity. The observed velocity is so unusual that the astronomers doing the observing have come to the conclusion that their data must be wrong somehow. It is a star that has either achieved or surpassed galactic escape velocity. Now, this is something that simply should not happen with a star so close to the galactic core. That is a very unusual thing indeed. Every now and then, stars do get ejected from the galaxy, but very seldom at the core. And to achieve this massive velocity, galactic escape velocity, is unusual in the extreme, and once again, something very strangely coincidental for a star that has so many other unusual qualities. So here's the question: what sort of alien megastructure could possibly propel a red giant out of the galaxy, and why the hell would any alien civilization want to do that in the first place? And on the sixth day, we who became one had survived a variety of different crises, including an existential crisis where our consciousness and our intelligence had begun to stagnate, and we had solved this problem with what were called parent units, an idea from our ancient past where two consciousnesses would create a new one and then teach it, educate it, and let it flourish on its own, and thus did our civilization grow. However, since the parents never died, the population continued to grow at an exponential rate, and even in a machine civilization, consciousness requires energy, and therefore we had to encase our own sun in a sphere that absorbed almost all of its energy in order to accommodate the constant growth of intelligence. However, this was nothing compared to the crisis we faced with another machine civilization that existed simply to destroy and create duplicates of itself. It was called a mega null and nearly snuffed us out. However, we prevailed against that threat as well and decided in order to sustain and perpetuate our civilization, it was necessary for us to expand and encase more suns in these spheres in order to accommodate the growing energy energy needs of our vast intellect. And as we did so, we also took note of other civilizations developing in the galaxy in our own self-interest, for we were concerned about any civilizations that might develop a hyper-intelligent artificial intelligence similar to the Omega Null that could represent a threat to not only us but the rest of the galaxy. There was one civilization in particular on the third planet of a rather ordinary star that seemed on the verge of creating something this dangerous. However, this civilization had a strange habit of extinguishing itself over and over again, never being able to completely pass its nuclear filter. In some ways, we found this to be regrettable, but in others, given this species' propensity to develop technology without any regard for its long-term consequences, it was probably better that it remain restricted to its own planet. That having been said, though, even our civilization found itself at another crossroads, another point of possible extinction from a source we never before thought of. It was determined that the future merging of two galaxies in our region, the two largest galaxies in our local group, was going to create a crisis far more serious than any of us ever anticipated. The merging of two black holes and the catastrophic results of this event. We estimated that there was an 83.782% chance that when these two massive black holes merged, it would create not a new black hole, but rather a quasar, with all of the massive consequences that go with the sudden creation of such an object. Massive gravitational waves, an enormous amount of electromagnetic radiation and X-rays being released, and also a vast void which would consume the vast majority of the stars at the cores of both galaxies. For a considerable period of time, there would be no safe place within the new galaxy. The quasar would generate so much radiation as to extinguish the vast majority of biological life anywhere near the core. In addition, there would be jets of superheated plasma coming off of the new quasar that would annihilate anything in its path, and even machine civilizations would be vulnerable to the vast outpourings of electromagnetic radiation. It was therefore decided that at least one system, at least a remnant of our civilization, would have to leave the galaxy in order to preserve our longevity. And on the seventh day, we who became one became we who preserved. The megastructure in question is called a Shkadov thruster, and all it is a colossal arc-shaped mirror with a concave side facing the star in question. And what would happen is the aliens would place the mirror at an arbitrary distance where the gravitational attraction from the star is balanced out by the outward pressure of the radiation. The mirror would then become a stable, static satellite in equilibrium between the gravity's tug and the push of solar radiation. And if you reflect this much solar radiation back onto the star, it actually provides a push like on a light sail. Now, it isn't a considerable push. We're talking millions and millions of years before the solar system can go anywhere. However, after 200 million years, for example, the sun moves about 10 to 40 parsecs. Now, this seems an absurdly small amount of distance for such an enormous amount of time, but if you want to move an entire solar system, this may be the only way to do it. Now, there are alternate versions of this type of thruster. One, for example, that also excites the surface of the star and produces jets of superheated plasma from the surface of the star, providing additional thrust. This would actually allow the solar system to accelerate even further, and by the way, the star would drag its planets along with it if it had any planets in orbit. Now, why would they use such an ancient star? Well, one of the justifications that was actually presented to me by one of my viewers is the fact that they eventually want to make use of a remaining white dwarf after the star goes through its nova process. A white dwarf is going to last forever. Billions and billions of years. You can use a Shkadov thruster, of course, bring it closer to the white dwarf in order to make maximum use of its energy, reflect it back on the white dwarf, and continue moving it throughout the cosmos. Again, if you achieve galactic escape velocity, you can, in theory, go any place you want, and a white dwarf is going to last practically forever. Now, the problem with VV-WIT-08 as far as a Skod thruster is concerned is the fact that it's in orbit. A Skod thruster should be relatively stationary in order to continue providing the maximum amount of solar radiation on the star in the desired direction. However, perhaps there's a reason that they're not doing this. For example, like a regular sail, you can actually adjust the angle of the mirrors in question while the object is in orbit to continue providing the necessary solar radiation in the desired direction without it having to be in the same location at all times. And when it orbits behind the star, perhaps it has to go through a cooling process at that point. Perhaps it can't keep reflecting that much solar radiation forever, and it needs to be in orbit if it's expected to last for that amount of time. In other words, billions of years. Now, this may seem absolutely absurd to people who only live for a century at most, and our entire civilization has only lasted for a few thousand years. The notion of surviving for billions and billions of years may seem absolutely ridiculous, but to a civilization like our fictional We Who Became One civilization, minds that last forever, the whole notion of what's going to happen to us in the long run, billions of years from now, may actually be important to them. And this is an explanation, albeit not a likely one, but still an interesting one to think about, as to why a star that should not be going at galactic escape velocity is traveling at that speed, or at least appears to be, and has a very strange and very large opaque object that obscures the light from the sun almost completely, and unlike any other object we've ever observed. Could it be a massive solar mirror that we're seeing the reverse side of, therefore no brilliance but instead darkness, that provides not only thrust but also absorbs solar energy in order to preserve either biological life on the surface of it, or perhaps a vast machine civilization? Now, of course, we always have to be careful about these sorts of explanations because alien technology can be custom fit to explain just about anything. However, this is not a reason for us to avoid any sort of speculation about the subject whatsoever. Yes, we have seen no actual tangible evidence of alien civilizations, at least no details about their technology, so it's difficult to speculate as to what they're actually capable of until we encounter them, but we're never going to encounter them unless we speculate on such matters, and the fact that most astrophysicists refuse to go down this path really aggravates the hell out of me. But instead of starting to rant, we will go back and conclude our story with We Who Preserved. And on the seventh day, we both marveled and mourned. The quasar was indeed one of the most magnificent spectacles that we had ever beheld. But at the same time, with that magnificence, there came death and devastation. The radiation levels were as high as we had predicted, and on top of that, the merging of the black holes created an alternate consequence that we did not anticipate. Instead of merging the two black holes together, the larger one provided a kick to the smaller, ejecting it from the galaxy entirely. And so it went on a rampage through the remnants of the galaxy, destroying system after system as it went. But the consequences became terrifyingly apparent as we realized that the black hole was going to escape the galaxy's gravitational influence and set off in pursuit of us. Though our own stellar engine was propelling us at a tremendous velocity, the black hole was pursuing us at a substantial percentage of the speed of light. It would certainly overtake us in time. Our stellar engineers worked at a frenzied pace, trying to come up with some sort of solution. It was determined that our long-term destination, a triangular-shaped galaxy with millions of stars and a very high stellar formation rate, an ideal place for our civilization to start again, would now have to be abandoned. If we were to survive, we would have to change our trajectory radically and leave the local group entirely. This would extend our journey for many billions of years. We didn't even have a potential destination, a fallback that made any kind of sense. We would be wandering in the dark and the cold of intergalactic space, possibly until the white dwarf powering our stellar engine and sustaining our civilization went out forever. Despair began to grip us. It became clear that survival, if it was even remotely possible, was not going to be easy. At long last, we decided to reverse course once we had eluded our deadly pursuer and try to return to our original destination. It would add an enormous amount of time to our journey, but at the same time, we had survived this long, so we felt confident that the long-term survival of our civilization was still possible. Meanwhile, in our wake, the galaxy was finally beginning to reform. There would be life there again, but there would be nothing like us. And so finally, we cast off the chains of despair and decided that in the memory of those we had left behind, if their sacrifice and if their deaths were to have any meaning, then we who preserved would have to focus all of our efforts, all of our energy, and all of our strength on one purpose: survival. And so it was on the 8th day that we became We Who Survive.